Morning, everyone. Welcome to our conference. And I think we've got more people here than we usually have, which is great. In particular, I'd like to welcome our guest speakers, the Bishop and the Dean. So the Bishop is here, the Dean is there, and they'll come forward a bit later. A big thank you to Paula and Heather for all the work they put into organising this event, as they always do. And where is Rosemary? There. Come forward, Rosemary. I think you probably all know that Rosemary is shortly to be retiring, can't you, Rosemary? So, and how many years have you done with us? 10 years. 10 years, which is great. So thank you on behalf of the Diocese for all the work you've done and the great support you've given to our schools over that time. And I do have some flowers for you. Standing at the back, we have Vicky and Tracy, who have recently joined us, and I hope we'll be able to meet them later on. Okay, so I'm kicking off, and normally at this conference I offer a State of the Union address. I mean that, folks, in which I outline recent developments in the diocese, in government and diocesan education policy, and I go through various initiatives that are taking place across the diocese. And as you're all aware, since 2010, our agenda has been dominated by structural change in education. But I want to set that agenda aside this morning and to return to thinking about our foundational principles and purposes in education. And in doing so, I'm minded of all the work that's taken place since the Deering report of 2001, The Way Ahead, to promote the distinctive Christian character of our schools. And in particular, I want to refer to the importance of the recent Church of England vision for education, deeply Christian, serving the common good. Our opening hymn at this morning's Eucharist, sung to the tune at Westminster Abbey, was Christ is made the sure foundation, Christ the head and cornerstone. I think it's good for us all to recollect that our schools are founded upon Christ. Now, of course, our schools are also funded by the state. And so, as Jesus says in St. Matthew's Gospel, we are required to give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, whilst we're also required by our trust deeds to give back to God that which is God's. Balancing the demands of the Secretary of State for Education and of the requirements of the diocese can, as you all know, be a very challenging task. Church of England schools have been described as threshold institutions operating at the boundary between church and state. As Professor Jeff Astley has described them, our schools are economically, educationally and culturally a halfway house of the gospel, a foster home, places where we find stepping stones to and from the community of the world and the community of the church. Now, since our schools are state funded, it's hardly surprising, is it, that they're often referred to incorrectly by our detractors as faith schools, and regarded by suspicion by some sections of the media and some very high-profile academics on the grounds that they think our schools are allegedly divisive and, secondly, socially selective, and they're neither. My response is, in fact, to say that education can never be a secular, values-free zone of human activity. By its very nature, education is concerned with the development of the human person and how each person develops a mature understanding of self and discovers a sense of identity in relation to other people and, from the Christian perspective, in relation to God, our Creator. In a sense, education, like the whole of life, is a process of becoming. This inevitably involves an exploration of personal and cultural identity. It's simply not possible to disaggregate values from a sphere of human activity which is so closely bound up with the identity of the individual. Secondly, it's important to note that as the law stands, as we sit and stand around today, all schools must have a daily act of collective worship, wholly or mainly of a Christian character. Of course, there's a right of withdrawal. So I would say it's a false dichotomy to argue that there are, on the one hand, faith schools, and on the other, secular or non-faith schools. In a sense, all schools are faith schools because of the underpinning legal requirements in respect of collective worship. But moving on specifically to the purposes of our Church of England schools. It's important to understand that our schools are an integral part of the national system of schooling and not a separate constituency. Following the formation of the National Society in 1811, the Church established thousands of schools in the 19th century to provide elementary education to the people at a time when the state did not do that. Other denominations followed suit. State provision of education only really began in earnest with the 1870 Education Act. This supplemented denominational provision, it did not supplant it, and that gave rise to what was known historically as the dual system. So in our church schools today, we do maintain this proud tradition of serving the nation in the name of God. But as this historic system fragments into hundreds of multi-academy trusts, if this process continues, I think that only the Anglican and the Catholic churches will be able to speak with authority from a national perspective on education. As we all know, church schools are popular with parents. And it's not simply that they are very good schools with good results. That's undoubtedly one of the factors in their popularity. But more fundamentally, parents have confidence that our schools provide a sound moral framework and a context in which the development of the whole child is nurtured. Parents welcome the fact that church schools have a culture rooted explicitly in a clear set of values and principles. At a time when children are young people are facing enormous pressures to conform to the prevailing consumerist and media-driven construct of success, and when, as we all know, social media can be used for negative as well as positive purposes, many parents want schools that are able to impart to their children a sense of right and wrong, human dignity, and a clear moral compass. This goes beyond the narrow and prevailing paradigm of education as providing a basis for personal and national prosperity into recognising the importance of the four pillars of the Church of England vision for education. They are wisdom, hope, community, and dignity. Now, preparing children and young people for work is one task of education, but preparing them to live out their potential as children of God and to become wise and fully rounded individuals is quite another. The book of Proverbs tells us, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost you all you have, get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. Embrace her, and she will honour you. She will give you a garland to grace your head and present you with a glorious crown. Let us also remember that our schools have a tradition derived from our history of serving the whole of the community and neighbourhood in which they are located. As inclusive institutions, our schools reflect the communities in which they are based. Many of our schools serve areas of significant social and economic disadvantage, whether in urban or rural areas. Church of England schools were established in the 19th century to educate the poor, and we continue that honourable tradition by maintaining our institutional presence in some of the most challenging areas in our society. The importance, therefore, of our schools as agents of community cohesion cannot be overlooked. Church schools are popular with faith communities and other faith communities precisely because they are places where the name of God is spoken and honoured. So in a church school, pupils can experience what it is to be part of a community based on religious principles. This gives them a practical awareness and understanding of religion so that they have a sound and informed basis for deciding for themselves whether they wish to make a religious commitment. This experience also gives them a language and a vocabulary for understanding faith, and I would argue that's a very significant intellectual asset in a world where religion is often in the headlines. Above all, I'd like to observe that our schools are places where children and young people can fully explore their own cultural and religious identities in a safe and secure context. So this can not only help them explore their own beliefs and values and their own sense of self, but also build up respect and understanding for different faiths and cultures too. The Deering report put it like this: as a community of faith, the church school should, in its best expression, reflect the nature of the Trinity, a life shared and defined by reference to others. Here we can begin to discover who we are, why we are, and perhaps most importantly, what we might be. In a society where people do still live according to different commitments and identities, church schools are therefore emblematic of the British values of valuing diversity, democracy, and the primacy of conscience under the rule of law. And however you understand that phrase, British values, they do themselves reflect our Judeo-Christian heritage, and that is the cultural and religious framework from which they're actually derived. Historically, the role of the sacred in shaping our national life goes all the way back to the time of our patron St. Chad and to St. Edward, King and Confessor, whose abbey church stands opposite the Palace of Westminster, where our laws are made. Our schools derive their legitimacy from the crown of St. Edward and ultimately from Christ himself, the Word made flesh, the timeless gift of God's love, and the truth from which all life flows. Of our church school's contribution to the world of education, the Deering report said, "The gift is Christ. The gift is Christ." In the popularity of Church of England schools, many parents see something that adds value to their children's education. Giving children a sense of their divine origin and of human dignity gives them a particular sense of self-respect and respect for others and of individual worth. That sense of being valued gives hope and purpose and is a strong foundation for learning and for contributing to the common good. Now, finally, as we all wrestle with the idea of national identity in the context of the Brexit negotiations, it's worth reflecting on the kind of society we might wish to become. Do we want to be a society in which religion is regarded as a purely private matter and relegated to the margins of public life and discourse, in which case it does have the capacity to be a divisive force? Or do we want to be a society in which religious expression is afforded an institutional involvement and presence within prescribed limits that are generally considered acceptable? The latter represents preeminently the Anglican settlement which has served our nation so well. As the established church, within our educational role, we have the opportunity and indeed the duty to contribute to the well-being of society. Historically, Church of England schools have literally been part of the national landscape, and they express the Church's concern for the whole society. In his 1830 treatise on the Constitution of the Church and State, it's a scary book, by the way, the great poet and writer Samuel Taylor Coleridge observed that a civilised society should benefit the many and not just enrich the few. If we are a Christian nation, he said, we must learn to act nationally as well as individually as Christians. That is why we, today, must be part of the reformation of education in our own age and in the future. And the vision of the founders of the National Society in offering education to the whole nation is still at the heart of our purposes in education today. So today we are celebrating our Church of England schools and their commitment to human flourishing and fullness of life for all. In a society obsessed with acquisition, status, celebrity, and individualism, we hold to a faith that claims the most radical basis for the equality and intrinsic dignity of all people. That is the knowledge that all people are equally loved by God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin, for setting the scene for us. My name's Mark Rylance. I'm the Bishop of Shrewsbury and the Chairman of the Board of Education. We are very lucky to have someone of Colin's calibre as our Director of Education here in Lichfield. He did a lot of work at Central Church House with education, so he came here with a lot of experience and knowledge. But for me, it's his passion and care for the place of church schools in society. So thank you for your vision, thank you for your drive, Colin.